The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was having coffee in my small apartment in Chicago. My Aunt Linda's voice was strained, carrying news that would shatter my world. "Jake, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your grandfather sold the farm before he passed." I nearly dropped my mug. "What do you mean he sold it? That farm's been in our family for over a century." "I know, honey. We're all shocked. Apparently he needed the money for medical bills and didn't want to burden anyone. The new owners are taking possession next week." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Grandpa Henry had raised me on that farm after my parents died in a plane crash when I was 8. Those 400 acres of Iowa farmland weren't just property to me. They were home, heritage, and identity all rolled into one. The farm had been established by my great-great-grandfather in 1889, carved from prairie grass with nothing but determination and a team of oxen. Every generation had added something. The red barn in 1923, the windmill in 1934, the modern irrigation system in the 1970s. It was a living museum of our family's perseverance. I'd always assumed the farm would eventually be mine. Grandpa had hinted at it countless times during our evening walks through the cornfields. He'd taught me everything about working the land, from reading weather patterns to understanding soil composition. But now, strangers owned my childhood home, the place where Grandpa taught me to drive a tractor, where we'd spent countless hours fishing in the old pond, where I'd learned the value of hard work and the satisfaction of a harvest well-earned. I called my boss and requested emergency leave. I had to see the farm one last time before it was gone forever. Chapter 2. Return to Heartbreak. 300 words. The 4-hour drive from Chicago to Millbrook, Iowa, felt like traveling backward through time. As I turned onto County Road 47, the familiar landscape of rolling hills and endless cornfields should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt like attending a funeral. The farmhouse came into view first, a 2-story white clapboard structure with a wraparound porch, where Grandpa used to sit every evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Now it looked empty and abandoned, with a "sold" sign planted firmly in the front yard like a gravestone. I parked my rental car in the gravel driveway and sat for a moment, overwhelmed by memories. This was where I'd learned to ride a bike, where Grandpa had taught me to milk cows, where we'd worked side by side during harvest season until my hands were calloused and my back ached with good, honest fatigue. The silence was deafening. No cattle lowing in the distance, no rumble of machinery, no sound of Grandpa's voice calling me in for supper. Just the whisper of wind through the corn stalks and the distant creak of the old windmill. I walked slowly toward the house, my feet crunching on the gravel path I'd run down thousands of times as a child. The front door was locked, but I knew where Grandpa kept the spare key, under the 3rd loose board on the porch steps. Inside, the house felt like a museum. Furniture covered in white sheets, family photos still hanging on the walls, but the life had been drained from it. The kitchen where Grandpa made his famous pancakes every Sunday morning was cold and sterile. I couldn't understand it. Why would he sell without telling me? Why would he let strangers take our family's legacy? Chapter 3. Searching for answers. 300 words. I spent the afternoon walking through the house, looking for any clue that might explain Grandpa's decision to sell. In his bedroom, I found stacks of medical bills dating back 2 years, treatments for the cancer he'd never told me about. The amounts were staggering: chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs were enormous. My heart ached as I realized how much he'd suffered in silence. Grandpa had always been fiercely independent, refusing help even when he clearly needed it. The idea of him facing cancer alone, worrying about money while fighting for his life, was almost unbearable. But even with the medical bills, something didn't add up. The farm was worth millions, far more than any medical debt could justify. And Grandpa had always been financially savvy, with investments and savings that should have covered his expenses. I found his desk in the study, the same roll-top oak desk where he'd taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12. The drawers were mostly empty, but I discovered a folder labeled Legal Documents tucked in the back. Inside were copies of various papers, insurance policies, his will, property tax records. But what caught my attention was a letter from a law firm in Des Moines, dated just 3 months before his death. The letter was formal and cold, discussing final arrangements for property transfer and mentioning previously agreed-upon terms. It was signed by someone named Richard Blackwood, attorney at law. What struck me as odd was the tone of the letter. It didn't read like correspondence with a willing seller. Instead, it sounded almost threatening, with phrases like failure to comply and legal consequences. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. Something about this sale wasn't right, and I was determined to find out what really happened. Chapter 4. The Windmill's Secret. 300 words. Unable to bear being inside the empty house any longer, I walked outside toward the old windmill. It stood about 100 yards behind the barn, a towering steel structure that had pumped water for the farm since the 1930s. Grandpa had always been proud of that windmill, maintaining it meticulously even after modern electric pumps made it obsolete. As a child, I'd been fascinated by the mechanical precision of its operation. Grandpa had explained how the wind turned the blades, which operated a rod that went deep into the ground to pump water from the aquifer below. He taught me to climb the maintenance ladder to oil the gears, always emphasizing safety and respect for the machinery. Now, as I approached the windmill, I noticed something I'd never seen before. The concrete foundation around the base was cracked, and in one section, the crack was wider than the others. It looked almost deliberate, as if someone had been digging there recently. Curious, I knelt down and examined the area more closely. The soil was loose, and when I brushed away some dirt, I felt something hard beneath the surface. Using my hands to dig, I uncovered the corner of what appeared to be a metal box. My heart raced as I worked to unearth the container. It was an old ammunition box, the kind used by the military during World War II. The metal was rusted, but still intact, and it was surprisingly heavy. The box was locked, but the rust had weakened the latch enough that I could force it open with a rock. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect them from moisture, were dozens of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be legal papers. My hands trembled as I lifted out the first bundle. These weren't just random family documents. They were evidence of something much more significant. Chapter 5. The Real Truth. 300 words. The first document I unwrapped made my blood run cold. It was the original deed to the farm, dated 1889, and signed by my great-great-grandfather. But more importantly, it was stamped "Never Transferred" in red ink, with a note in Grandpa's handwriting, hidden from Richard Blackwood and Associates. The farm was never legally sold. My mind reeled as I processed this information. If the farm was never legally sold, then what had happened? Who was Richard Blackwood, and why did Grandpa feel the need to hide the deed? I continued examining the documents, finding copies of threatening letters from Blackwood's law firm, photographs of men in expensive suits visiting the farm, and most shocking of all, a detailed journal in Grandpa's handwriting documenting months of harassment and intimidation. The journal entries painted a horrifying picture. Blackwood represented a development company that wanted to build a shopping complex on our land. When Grandpa refused to sell, they began a campaign of psychological warfare designed to force him into submission. March 15th. They came again today. Blackwood and 2 other men. They said if I don't sell voluntarily, they'll find other ways to get the property. I told them this farm isn't for sale at any price. April 2nd. Someone cut our fence lines last night. Found 20 head of cattle wandering on the highway. Could have been a disaster. I know it was them. May 10th. They're getting more aggressive. Blackwood showed me forged documents claiming I'd already agreed to sell. Said if I don't cooperate, they'll destroy my reputation and claim I'm mentally incompetent. The entries continued for months, documenting escalating threats, property damage, and psychological manipulation. Grandpa had been fighting a war I never knew existed, protecting our family's legacy against people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Chapter 6. The Conspiracy Unfolds. 300 words. As I read deeper into Grandpa's journal, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Blackwood's firm wasn't working alone. They had connections with local officials, including the county assessor and even someone in the sheriff's department. June 3rd. They've been bribing county officials to inflate my property taxes. Got a bill today for 3 times what I paid last year. When I called to complain, they said there was nothing they could do. June 20th. Sheriff's deputy came by asking about complaints from neighbors about noise and livestock violations. All lies, but they're building a case to make me look like a problem landowner. The most chilling entry was dated just 2 weeks before Grandpa's death. July 18th, Blackwood came with final papers today. Said if I don't sign, they'll have me committed to a nursing home and get power of attorney through their connections in the court system. I signed the papers to buy time, but I made sure they weren't the real deed. The actual deed is safe where they'll never find it. I realized that Grandpa had been playing a dangerous game, pretending to cooperate while secretly protecting the farm's true ownership. The papers he'd signed were probably worthless forgeries, designed to make Blackwood think he'd won while the real deed remained hidden. But there was more in the box. I found photographs of the men who had been threatening Grandpa, including clear shots of their license plates and faces. There were also copies of bank records showing large payments from Blackwood's firm to various local officials. Grandpa had been building a case against his tormentors, documenting everything in preparation for a legal battle. But his death had interrupted his plans, leaving the evidence buried beneath the windmill where only someone who truly knew him would think to look. Chapter 7. Family Betrayal. 300 words. The most devastating discovery came in the final section of documents. Among the papers was a copy of a bank deposit slip showing a payment of $50,000 to my Aunt Linda, the same aunt who had called to tell me about the farm sale. Attached to the deposit slip was a note in Grandpa's handwriting. Linda has been feeding information to Blackwood about my health, my finances, and my daily routines. She thinks I don't know, but I've been watching. The money they paid her explains why she's been encouraging me to sell. I sat back on my heels, stunned by this revelation. Linda had been like a second mother to me after my parents died. She'd visited the farm regularly, always seeming concerned about Grandpa's welfare. Now I realized her visits had a different purpose entirely. There were more documents proving Linda's involvement, copies of emails she'd sent to Blackwood's office, providing detailed information about Grandpa's medical appointments, his financial situation, and even his daily habits. She'd been a spy in our own family, selling out her father for money. One email was particularly damning. "Dad's getting suspicious about the property tax increases. You need to back off for a few weeks. Also, his doctor says the cancer is progressing faster than expected. You might not need to wait much longer." The callousness of that message made me sick. Linda had been betting on Grandpa's death, helping strangers harass a dying man for financial gain. But Grandpa had been smarter than any of them realized. He'd documented everything, creating an ironclad case against the conspiracy. The real question now was what to do with this evidence. I carefully rewrapped the documents and placed them back in the box. I had the proof I needed to expose the truth, but I also had to be careful. These people had already shown they were willing to break the law to get what they wanted. Chapter 8. Confronting the Lies. 300 words. I drove straight to Linda's house in town, the metal box secured in my trunk. She lived in a modest 2-story colonial that she'd owned for 20 years, but I noticed several recent improvements. New siding, a renovated driveway, and an expensive car in the garage. Improvements that $50,000 in blood money could easily finance. Linda answered the door with a surprised smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jake, I didn't expect to see you so soon. How are you holding up, honey?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past her into the living room. Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay? You seem upset." I pulled out one of the bank deposit slips and placed it on her coffee table. $50,000 from Blackwood and Associates. Want to explain this? The color drained from Linda's face. She sank into her armchair, suddenly looking much older than her 55 years. Jake, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. Really, because it looks like you sold out your own father for money. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. They approached me 2 years ago, said they just wanted information about Dad's health, his finances. They made it sound like they were trying to help him. Help him? They were terrorizing him. I didn't know about that part, I swear. They told me they wanted to make him a generous offer for the farm, enough to cover all his medical bills and set him up comfortably for the rest of his life. And you believed them. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. I needed the money, Jake. My husband lost his job. We were behind on the mortgage. When they offered $50,000 just for information, I thought it was harmless. Harmless. Your father died thinking his own daughter had betrayed him. Chapter 9. The legal battle begins. 300 words. The next morning, I drove to Des Moines with the metal box and all its contents. I'd spent the night researching lawyers who specialized in property fraud and elder abuse, finally settling on Margaret Chen, an attorney with an impressive track record of taking on corrupt developers. Chen's office was in a sleek downtown building, but her demeanor was warm and professional. She listened intently as I explained the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I showed her the documents from the box, her expression grew increasingly serious. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of elder abuse and property fraud I've ever seen, she said, carefully examining each piece of evidence. Your grandfather was remarkably thorough in documenting the harassment, so the farm is still legally mine. Absolutely. The deed they claim to have is worthless. Your grandfather never actually transferred ownership. He just signed papers that looked official but had no legal standing. Chen leaned back in her chair. The question is whether we pursue criminal charges or focus on civil litigation. I want both. These people destroyed my grandfather's final years. That's going to be expensive and time-consuming. Blackwood's firm has deep pockets and political connections. They'll fight dirty. I thought about Grandpa's journal entries, his fear and isolation during those final months. I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. They need to pay for what they did. Chen smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Good, because I've been wanting to take down Richard Blackwood for years. He's been running similar scams across 3 counties, targeting elderly farmers and stealing their land through intimidation and fraud. Within hours, Chen had filed injunctions to stop any development on the farm and initiated both criminal and civil proceedings against Blackwood and his associates. Chapter 10. Justice served. 300 words. The legal battle lasted 8 months, but Grandpa's meticulous documentation made the case airtight. Blackwood's firm tried every dirty trick in their playbook, challenging the evidence, claiming the documents were forged, even attempting to bribe witnesses. But Chen was relentless, and the truth was too well documented to suppress. The criminal trial was a media sensation. Local news outlets picked up the story of the elderly farmer who'd outsmarted a corrupt development company, and soon national media was covering the case. The FBI got involved when evidence emerged of similar schemes in other states. Blackwood himself was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, and racketeering. His associates received shorter sentences, but all lost their law licenses and faced massive financial penalties. The corrupt county officials were also prosecuted. The assessor who'd inflated Grandpa's property taxes was sentenced to 5 years, and the sheriff's deputy who'd harassed him lost his job and pension. Linda testified against Blackwood in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received 2 years of probation and was ordered to pay full restitution. Our relationship was permanently damaged, but I felt some satisfaction knowing she'd have to live with the consequences of her betrayal. The civil case resulted in a settlement of $12 million, money that Blackwood's firm had to pay from their ill-gotten gains. I donated half to organizations that help elderly victims of fraud and used the rest to modernize the farm and establish a trust to ensure it would never be vulnerable to such schemes again. But the most meaningful victory was simpler. I was going home. The farm that had been in our family for over a century would remain in our family, just as Grandpa had intended. Chapter 11. Returning home. 300 words. Moving back to the farm felt like awakening from a long, dark dream. I quit my job in Chicago and threw myself into restoring the property to its former glory. The house needed work after sitting empty for months, but the bones were solid, just like the family that had built it. I started with Grandpa's bedroom, converting it into a home office where I could manage the farm's operations. I hung his favorite photographs on the walls and kept his old desk exactly as he'd left it. Sometimes, when I was working late into the evening, I could almost feel his presence guiding me. The windmill became a monument to his memory. I had it fully restored and installed a small plaque at its base. In memory of Henry Thompson, who protected this land with wisdom, courage, and love. I never told anyone about the hidden box. That secret would remain between Grandpa and me. I modernized the farming operations while respecting traditional methods. Solar panels powered the irrigation systems. But I still planted the same heirloom corn varieties that Grandpa's grandfather had brought from Germany. Technology and tradition worked hand in hand, just as Grandpa would have wanted. The local community welcomed me back with open arms. Many of the neighbors had suspected something wasn't right about the farm's supposed sale, and they were relieved to see a Thompson working the land again. Mrs. Patterson, who lived on the adjacent farm, brought over a casserole and told me how proud Grandpa would be. "He used to talk about you all the time," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Said you were the only one who truly understood what this place meant to the family." As harvest season approached, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The farm was alive again, productive and profitable, a testament to generations of hard work and dedication. Chapter 12. New Traditions. 300 words. 2 years after reclaiming the farm, I'd established new traditions while honoring old ones. Every Sunday morning, I made Grandpa's famous pancakes in the same cast-iron skillet he'd used for decades. I ate them on the front porch, watching the sunrise over fields that stretched to the horizon. I'd also started hosting an annual harvest festival, inviting the entire community to celebrate the end of another successful growing season. Families came from miles around to enjoy fresh corn, homemade pies, and live music in the same barn where Grandpa had taught me to square dance. During one festival, a young girl named Emma reminded me of myself at that age. Curious about everything, eager to learn, and fascinated by the farm's history. I taught her to milk cows and drive the small tractor, just as Grandpa had taught me. "Why do you love this place so much?" she asked one afternoon as we walked through the cornfields. I paused, considering how to explain something so profound to an 8-year-old. "Because it's not just land," I said finally. "It's a story that's been written by my family for over 100 years. Every building, every field, every tree has memories in it. When I take care of this place, I'm taking care of all those memories too." She nodded solemnly, as if she understood perfectly. That evening, as I sat on the front porch watching another spectacular Iowa sunset, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. The farm was exactly where it belonged, in the hands of someone who loved it, protected it, and understood its true value. The windmill turned slowly in the evening breeze, its blades catching the last rays of sunlight. Somewhere beneath its foundation lay an empty metal box, a reminder of the battle that had been fought and won. Chapter 13. Legacy Secured. 300 words. 5 years have passed since I discovered the truth beneath the windmill. The farm now spans 500 acres, having purchased adjacent properties from neighbors ready to retire. It's become a model of sustainable agriculture, hosting university research projects and serving as an educational center for young farmers. I married Sarah, an agricultural scientist who shares my passion for the land. We're expecting our first child, and we've already decided that regardless of gender, the baby will grow up learning the same values Grandpa taught me: respect for the earth, the importance of hard work, and the understanding that some things are more valuable than money. The legal victory against Blackwood had far-reaching consequences. New laws were passed protecting elderly landowners from predatory developers, and a special task force was created to investigate similar schemes. Grandpa's courage in documenting his tormentors had helped protect countless other families from the same fate. I still visit the windmill regularly, especially on difficult days when I need to feel connected to Grandpa's wisdom. The plaque at its base has weathered beautifully, and wildflowers now grow around the foundation where the metal box once lay hidden. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never returned to the farm, if I'd simply accepted Linda's story about the sale. The land would have been lost forever, turned into another soulless shopping complex. Grandpa's sacrifice would have been meaningless. But he knew me better than that. He knew I'd come back, knew I'd search for answers, and knew I'd look in all the places that held our shared memories. The windmill wasn't just a hiding place, it was a test of faith, a final lesson about perseverance and the importance of never giving up on what matters most. The farm is secure now, protected by legal trusts and surrounded by family who understand its true value. Grandpa's legacy lives on in every sunrise, every harvest, every child who learns about agriculture in our fields. His story continues through mine, and someday, through my children's stories too. Thank you so much for listening to this story about family loyalty, hidden truths, and the courage to fight for what's rightfully yours. I hope it reminded you that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with persistence, documentation, and an unwavering belief in justice. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and if you have any family stories about land, inheritance, or discovering hidden secrets that changed everything. Your stories inspire the content I create. If you enjoyed this tale of mystery and justice, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories about family secrets, rural life, and the unexpected discoveries that can change the course of our lives. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. And thank you again for being part of our storytelling community. Until next time, remember that the truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's buried beneath years of lies and deception. Sometimes all it takes is someone who cares enough to keep digging.